The Chosen Season 4 Roundtables have been amazing so far. We've really gleaned some awesome stuff from them. Of course, in this episode, we want to talk about something unique when it comes to Jesus and his understanding as being a human and God at the same time. The hypostatic union, however you want to say that, is one of the most confusing mysteries that we have of Jesus. How did he exist in the world, being fully man and yet fully God, and yet having his godhood as something not to be clung to, and so he put it aside? What does that look like? Because there's times when Jesus can read people's minds. There's times when Jesus obviously heals, or different things happen around him, right, that are clearly of God. Yet, he's still a human and has human feelings. He weeps as a human. He gets angry as a human. Yet all of that is within godhood as well. It's very confusing, but in episode 5 of season 4, we get kind of this one moment where he kind of reminds his mom, hey, I'm human as well. And so we're going to talk about this as we jump into this episode right here.
And a quick sickness and death. But that leads to Jesus being reunited with his mother. Mm-hmm. And there's this scene where Jonathan and I actually talked about this. During the scene, he's expressing frustration to Mary, and she says, "Well, can you blame them? I mean, they're only human." And Jonathan actually suggested this line, also human. And so that brings up the hypostatic union debate that has gone on for thousands of years, and several people believe it can be solved in a single YouTube comment. But everyone at this table, I believe, contends that Jesus was fully God and fully man. But here we are really exploring his humanity. And so I'll start with you. I think you've always appreciated our portrayal of Mary in the show as Jesus being very close with Jesus and having a heart knitted with Jesus, but also being a human. And I've always seen portrayals of Mary, particularly from the Catholic Church, as almost divine.
Yeah, I would say yes. This is absolutely true from a Protestant point of view. Looking at Mary in the Catholic Church is terrifying. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of Protestants, it's probably their number one kind of touching point with Catholics, which is scary, is this idea that they have of Mary being this divine being. It makes us very, very uncomfortable, for sure. I'm not saying that, we're not going to get into the argument, but that's definitely a touch point for sure.
But what's the level of comfort that you think within the Catholic Church, within the various groups of our portrayal of Mary, and this kind of a discussion? She says, "Yeah, I change your soiled diapers. Mm-hmm. I know you're a human." We go a little casual with their relationship sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting. The figure of the blessed, what we would call the Blessed Mother. A lot of people, I think, have an image of her, and the image they have is somebody who's very emotionally constant, who's present, but seeing her portrayed as someone who laughs, someone who does earthly things, someone who would make a comment like she did about that will get reaction, right. And so I think the human side of in Mary. But it's probably more easier for people to accept that than I think some of the human side of Jesus.
Sure.
And there's people that think Jesus was really much more human than even portrayed in this series. Right. But most Catholics probably lean on the other side of that Jesus was much more on the divine side. He knew everything, anticipated everything, was prepared for everything, and so he's kind of going through it. But nothing's a surprise to him, and it's all kind of unfolding. I think that you have a really beautiful middle ground here, and
yeah, I think The Chosen does a great job. Obviously, I'm a lot different than Dallas. I would have written this show slightly differently than Dallas. I probably would have written Mary a little bit differently than Dallas does, and Jesus a little bit differently than Dallas does. But I think that he does a great job in this show of showing Jesus' divinity as well as his humanity. And I think that, for example, season 1, episode 3 does a great job of showing his humanity as he's healing a wound, as he's crafting things because he's a carpenter, as he's interacting with the children. But then, for example, episode 6, yes, episode 6 of season 4, he basically says, "I am God." right? He's very clear that he's not just the Messiah, he is God. And so he talks about that, John chapter 10, you can read all through there. They literally accuse him in the temple of blasphemy, of claiming to be God. So there was no misunderstanding it, right? He is saying to them, I am God, in the plainest of terms. And so it's really interesting to see the connections there in The Chosen. I think they do a pretty good job, for sure. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this video, a great free way to help is just to watch the rest of this video, all the way to the end of the video if you can, and then if you really like us, you can watch another video after that. This will tell the YouTube algorithm that you like our channel and that our channel is good enough to share with other people, and it would really, really help us out. But if you want to go above and beyond, you can go to snipesupport.com and pledge $5, $10, or $25 a month and really help us out on a consistent basis to put out more videos just like this. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
And to try to see the ways that if you're going to be fully human, and we believe that he is, then he's going to have to experience some of the things that humans experience.
He has to experience all of the things that humans experience, right? All of the emotions, all of the feelings, right? He is human. And so he lived a human life. It's really important that that's who Jesus is.
Being disappointed by people around us, being concerned for people that we love. So
being tempted by things. These are things that Jesus would have gone through. Of course, he didn't fall to temptation, but he definitely would have been tempted by different things in his life, by Satan directly, right? We see that right after he's baptized and he goes into the wilderness. We see that. So there's a lot of that in Jesus' life. Absolutely.
I think most Catholics find the portrayal edifying and enlightening and makes them think.
I mean, the majority of Catholics that I've come in contact with, and when I was in Rome and I'm in St. Peter's Basilica, one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, but also can be somewhat emotionally distancing because it's so big and beautiful, and the art in history of the Catholic Church tends to portray Jesus, Mary, disciples, very formal. There's often a halo around the head, very serious.
Yeah. Like, can you imagine a Catholic painting of Mary changing Jesus's poopy diaper? Some would call that irreverent. I would call that realistic, right? But we would never see it, right? We would just never, ever see it, for sure.
But I would say the majority of Catholics that I've encountered have expressed appreciation for the portrayal of Mary and Jesus. But I've always believed that some of those portrayals that we've seen of Jesus and Mary as so serious and so pious are in some ways I wouldn't call it anti-Jewish, but I do think they somewhat diminish the Jewishness of Jesus and his people, not just because of the skin color, which we know that Jesus is oftentimes portrayed or painted as reflective of whatever culture is doing the painting, but even just it's unheard of. I've never seen, even as a Gentile, I've never seen a rabbi who was so pious as how Jesus is often portrayed, and it just seems to be contradictory to his Jewishness to see him as this formal figure. And you've said that yourself sometimes when you're preaching, oftentimes, not always, but sometimes there's a discomfort with jokes, with a more casual approach. And I think the Jewish approach to teaching even is very funny, very casual, very human, and it seems like Jesus would have personified that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the unique thing about Jesus, he's the only person ever to be a 200% person.
That's very true. I joke all the time. So if you guys don't know, my nationality is I'm half black, I'm half white, right? So I always tell people, I was like, just like Jesus, I'm 100% black and 100% white. I'm 200%, you know, but obviously joking, but Jesus is 200%, right? He's 100% God and 100% man, the only person to ever be that, right?
Right. He's 100% God and he's 100%, human. There is a mystery in that, we can get into fancy theological words like hypostatic union, but I think that's the reality. I think as far as the Jewishness of Jesus and of a rabbi, look, one of the clear biblical commandments, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serve the Lord with joy and gladness. It is a foundational belief that joy is one of the key ways that you serve God, right? And so joy has always been important. That's why you have one of the reasons why you have wine at every occasion. That's the reason why there's so much singing, like you saw.
Yeah, singing, dancing, wine, this is a huge part of Jewish culture, things that Jesus would have done all the time in his culture, for sure.
Disciples doing in The Chosen, which accurately portrays what Jewish people do at their holiday celebrations or at weddings. If you've ever been to a wedding, Jewish wedding or a wedding in Israel, the dancing, the singing, the celebration, it's a simcha. It's what it's actually called. These celebrations are called a simcha, means a joy. And that's an important thing to be able to understand. But I also just think you look at the Gospels and you see how the kids like to come to Jesus. If Jesus was this stern, uptight dude, right? Children are not going to be attracted to him, right? So obviously there had to be a playfulness, a sense of humor to him that even children were drawn to the warmth and the joy they felt emanating from. If he was a stern guy, they'd be scared of him and kind of want to run from him.
Yeah, if he was like a hard rabbi that was like yelling at everybody, obviously the children would not want to come to Jesus, which makes a lot of sense. We actually talked about this recently. If you want to see our deep dives, we're going back through season 1 of The Chosen. So we just talked about episode 3 really recently, showing the humanity of Jesus and showing like kind of what he's going through there and how people actually got upset at Jesus blowing these raspberries and things like that and calling it irreverent and calling it not something that Jesus would do. But I think that that's probably wrong. I think that he was a joyful and funny. There's a lot of moments where Jesus is sarcastic in the Bible, where it's just like these funny moments, man. And we don't often portray Jesus like that. So The Chosen is one of the first projects to really do that in a convincing way, for sure.
So we show Mary washing his hair, and I thought back to my childhood. Jesus references the licking of her thumb and wiping something on his face. Most of us have experienced that. Even when she pulls out his hair and he's like, "Ow!" and she's like, "Oh, hush, you're fine." I'm just like, come on, Mary's a Jewish mom. She's not a wallflower. I'd love to close with some comments I've actually heard from you. Because I think they're very powerful about the humanity of Jesus, and that it's not a diminishment to that, but that in fact he was. Well, I'll let you talk about it, but that more human than even we were.
I like to remind people that in a really very serious way, Jesus is more human than any of us, and that's because we have all tainted our humanity with sin. Sin is not human.
This is a really interesting thing to think about because oftentimes we equate being human, being imperfect, with being sinful, with being evil almost. So that the baseline of humanity is we are evil and then God rescues us from that. So I wonder where he's going to go with that here.
Adam and Eve were totally human before they sinned. Sin actually tampers and decreases humanity. So I think it's ideal to portray Jesus in all of his humanness. Granted, for many years, people have debated and disputed Jesus' divinity, so we need to protect that. Yeah. But I think it's been at the cost of his humanity in many people's minds. And
yeah, this is the main reason why The Chosen has distanced itself from the LDS Church, for example. Even if you hear, for example, even when you hear someone like Daryl Eves talk about The Chosen, there has been many interviews in the past where Daryl will talk about The Chosen, but he intentionally distances himself from LDS and how the LDS is not connected to The Chosen, even though Daryl himself is LDS. And that is because this is the main issue that LDS has with traditional Christianity, right? And it's the main issue that Protestants generally have with LDS is that Jesus was a man who became God, and yet in Christianity, Jesus was always fully man and always fully God, even from the moment that he was born on earth and before that, right? Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am, calling himself the name of God. And so this is a huge dispute. I think it's probably one of the main reasons why we're not seeing an LDS member on this table, for example, is because this is a major, major dispute and something that The Chosen is not aligned with. There are a lot of other things that the LDS Church would probably love about this show, but there are definitely major points that the LDS Church would disagree with 100% when it comes to, understanding the story of the chosen and where Jesus is here for sure.
So I really appreciate showing Jesus as a functioning human being.
Sure.
With all of those emotions and experiences that humans have, which is how the New Testament describes him.
But I think we often don't take in the depth of what you're saying, which is so important. There's a joke that the Jewish people are like everybody else, only more so. Right? So there's a sense that Jesus...
The kids would say they're extra.
right? A little extra. Right? So Jesus was like everyone, like all humanity, but in many ways, but more so. But think about that. That meant he felt more. Mm-hmm. The sense of rejection, the sense of suffering, all of that was on a much deeper level because sin desensitizes us. It's kind of like our emotions and our feelings is kind of like we're wearing gloves. We can't fully feel, but he didn't have that.
Even temptation. He felt temptation.
There we go.
Worse than any of us, because when does temptation stop? When you sin. Now you're not tempted anymore because you've given into it. Mm. He never gave into it, so the temptation is all the more ramped up for him. So I sometimes describe, you've heard of the omni descriptors of God. He's omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, all-loving. I like to describe God as omnipassionate. He has all of the emotions. The difference, of course, is being perfect. Jesus can have all the emotions and have them rightly directed at the right people. We get angry at work and come home and direct it at the dog, or we're sad about this thing and it comes out as anger about that thing.
Right.
Jesus could hold all those emotions and have them rightly directed. He's omnipassionate.
In our portrayal of Jesus' humanity, we do not deny his divinity. In fact, you see throughout the seasons, he does miracles. He, at one point in episode 1 of season 2, says, "I am that I am." He is asserting his godness, his divinity, but as Dr. Huffman has said, he is more human than any of us. And when you hear "be like Jesus," that actually in some ways can be interpreted as be more human, more like the humanity that you were created to be. And if there's anything else if there's nothing else that the chosen can do, it's to illustrate that Jesus did feel what we felt, but even more so, but did not sin. And so if we are to be more like him, it's not to deny our humanity, it's to actually pursue more of it.
Yeah, so cool. Love that little clip there. I love talking about this subject as we have talked about for many years now on this channel and on my previous channel, and kind of going through all that we're going through when it comes to the divinity of Jesus and how that stands within the chosen and biblically, how we understand that. It's such an interesting thing. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm sure there's going to be some quarreling and some comments and stuff like that. Just be careful with all that. Be kind no matter what you say and keep it biblical down there. But anyway, we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.